Hello, and welcome to I Hated That Book, the podcast where a woman in her rage era unapologetically rants about the books she can't escape. This week, we're talking about The Ministry of Time by Kaliane Bradley. First, before I start, as always, a few words about this podcast and why I'm doing it what I'm doing. Basically, I read a lot of books, and I hate most of them, and so I need to talk about it. I don't just want to flame stuff. I understand writing a book is hard, and I am trying to understand what it is I liked or disliked, and why that's different from so many other people's experiences of these books. But it's also fun to make fun of stuff. So today we are talking about The Ministry of Time by Kaliane Bradley. First, I'm going to give a little overview of the book, then talk about the characters, the plot, the world building. I'm going to read some very fun reviews from Goodreads, and then I'll end with my overall impressions about the book. So this book was published May 2nd, 2024. It is currently a Hugo nominee for the best book of the year. It has 145,000 ratings on Goodreads and an average of 3.59 stars. The tag says, a time travel romance, a spy thriller, a workplace comedy, and an ingenious exploration of the nature of power and the potential for love to change it all. Welcome to The Ministry of Time, the exhilarating debut novel by Kaliane Bradley. Before I continue, I would just like to say, I think someone disagrees with me about the meaning of the word exhilarating. I should have looked it up in the dictionary for this, but this novel is not exhilarating. All right, here is the summary. In the near future, a civil servant is offered the salary of her dreams and is, shortly afterward, told what project she'll be working on. A recently established government ministry is gathering expats from across history to establish whether time travel is feasible, for the body, but also for the fabric of space-time. She is tasked with work as a bridge, living with, assisting, and monitoring the expat known as 1847, or Commander Graham Gore. As far as history is concerned, Commander Gore died on Sir John Franklin's doomed 1845 expedition to the Arctic, so he's a little disoriented to be living with an unmarried woman who regularly shows her calves, surrounded by outlandish concepts such as washing machines, Spotify, and the collapse of the British Empire. But with an appetite for discovery, a 7-a-day cigarette habit, and the support of a charming and chaotic cast of fellow expats, he soon adjusts. Over the next year, what the bridge initially thought would be, at best, a horrifically uncomfortable roommate dynamic evolves into something much deeper. By the time the true shape of the ministry's project comes to light, the bridge has fallen haphazardly, fervently in love, with consequences she could never have imagined. Forced to confront the choices that brought them together, the bridge must finally reckon with how and whether she believes what she does next can change the future. An exquisitely original and fervishly fun fusion of genres and ideas, The Ministry of Time asks, what does it mean to defy history when history is living in your house? Kaliane Bradley's answer is a blazing, unforgettable testament to what we owe each other in a changing world. I didn't realize this until I read that. This is like the back cover copy, like the little blurb that they tell you to read the book. That is literally 75% of the book. They just summarized the first 75% of the book's plot. So you could just read that and then read the last 50 pages and you'd be good. Great job, whoever wrote that. Great job. Just shows you how little happens in this book. So now that we've done that, also I just have to say, I forgot to say this earlier, there's going to be spoilers. So I'm assuming that you either have read this book and don't care or you don't care. Characters. Regarding characters, they're not that objectionable. They're just not that great either. Although I thought they all had just too many nicknames and names in general. And I was like, which one is 1847 again? Which one is 16? What? The narrator, who is nameless, is pretty much a big bowl of nothing who has no agency whatsoever. Why does this happen all the time? She has no agency in the story. She just sort of watches this guy. We have no sense of what she's after, what's her goal, what's her problem, why she is the main character, because she is just a passenger to other people's stories for 99% of the novel. It's not even like The Great Gatsby, what's his name? Nick, I think his name, because there's not really another main character that we're getting through her eyes in the same way. And also I don't even like The Great Gatsby. So the boss, Adela, she exists. So does Quentin. And the co-worker, Samalia, who is, I think that's how you say her name. I kind of didn't really understand their fights. I was like, this feels like very contrived conflict, but whatever. And then we have the time travelers. First we have Graham Gore. I guess he's a fine love interest. He's amusing sometimes, but why does he fall in love with her? Sure, he's funny and he cooks, so I get why we like him, but why does he like the narrator? What is good about her? She's just a wet sock of a human being. Okay. Margaret is also fine. I would say I think she has better chemistry with the narrator than Gore, except I really did not appreciate the extended depiction of her cleavage. The author lampshades it, and I was like, oh wow, now you've proved that you are Just as bad as all those terrible male authors everybody makes fun of. Way to go. Way to bring the bar down. Way to meet the lowest common denominator. Wow. So glad literature is, instead of moving up, we're just all becoming the lowest common denominator. Arthur, he's fine. And there's that other lady, and then that sexist guy, I guess. I don't know. And then her family, to be honest, I thought her family was the most interesting part. And whenever she talks about her family, it feels like the most lived in part of the book. The rest of the book is to me, it's very vague on like details and just like the feelings of lived experience. And then when she talks about her family, it feels very real and authentic. And at one point she says her parents are the type of people that no one would ever write a book about. And I was like, actually, I would really like to hear a book about your parents' experiences. They're the most interesting thing in this book. Also, Mean, why do you think you're interesting? You're so boring. Are you kidding me? Okay, so those are the characters. Now we got to talk about the plot, because this is where the real problem is, or one of them. Once again, as with Addie LaRue, what is the plot of this book? Someone please tell me. This is another pull yourself through book. It is just so boring. All it is just a bunch of people making tea and smoking. And then the narrator goes to work sometimes and gets yelled at vaguely by her mysterious boss. For the first 200 pages, nothing happened. Our girl just sort of watches Gore do stuff. Never really gets involved other than explaining to him, oh, you used the wrong word, whatever. She goes to work sometimes. The story never really dwells on anything long enough. Either the work or the time travel romance would be, better if she spent more time on them, but she just sort of half-asses both of them, and neither is enough. Seriously, what happens in this book? She gets a job, she meets Gore, takes him home, okay. She meets the other time travelers, and they're kind of friends now. Quentin disappears, and she vaguely wonders what happened to him, but doesn't really do anything. One of the problems I found with the older narrative, again, looking back, is that it robs it of all tension. It's like, okay, what else is she supposed to do? Okay, so it's just doomed. Love it. Loving this. The narrator is either clueless or powerless. It's very unclear, because she seems to think she's very savvy, and then she'll tell you, oh yeah, I failed my field training, or, Adela asked about my plastic surgery, and I clearly gave her the wrong answer. Or when Adela's like, yes, I know you met Quentin and I know everything. So how can this narrator do anything? She's so impotent. All she does is get horny over some super dead people. She just has no agency and does absolutely nothing. I guess she teaches Gore how to ride a bike, kind of, but he mostly figures it out for himself because she's useless. Quentin stops answering her emails, but she doesn't really do anything. Months pass. Like literally in this book so many times, it's like, oh yes, and then months pass. And you're like, what? There's a little hint of mystery, but the narrator is never really compelled to investigate or do anything about it or even dwell on it. And as the audience, you're like, okay, some nefarious crap is going on. The government is up to some shady stuff. Are we not going to sneak in and investigate and be too stupid to live and try to find out what's going on? There's so many questions that just go nowhere, and they raise no tension at all. What is this device? Why does this matter? What is this door? Where is it from? How did the British government just steal it? Why are the time travelers glitching? How can they choose to glitch? Why these so many of these questions get I guess they get lip service answers later as you go on, but it's really, you have so many questions and the narrator just doesn't care. And then all of a sudden she gets attacked by future people outside a bar. Okay. And then Gore gets taken away from her, and then he comes back, and then they have so much sex. And now we're at the point where the back cover copy finally reaches 75% of the way into the novel. So thanks for spoiling the entire novel. Yeah, I guess the people from the future attack. Then months pass, right, after this attack. Nothing happens for a while. And then we find out that Adela, the boss, is kind of, sort of our narrator from the future, but not really. And then Semelia is the mole, and then she shoots at the time machine, and for some reason Adela and one of the bad guys explode, but not the other time travelers, and the machine is kind of broken but not really, and the narrator kills one of the guys. I honestly would really like it if the back cover copy covered the entire novel, because I have no idea what happened after that point. I'm so confused. I have no idea what happened. And then I guess Gore and Margaret leave, and the narrator is leaving this book to herself, and Gore does love her, so it's a good love story, I guess. And I have so many questions. What is this ending? Did she just kill her future self? Are there different timelines? I'm so confused. Someone please help me. I'm really smart, I promise. So that's the plot. The world building. What even, as I was kind of intimating with my description of the plot, the world build, There's no world building. At the beginning, the author lampshades the time travel part. She's like, don't even worry about it, winky face. And you're like, but I am worried. I have so many questions. You keep saying you can't change the past, but clearly you did. You clearly caused the expedition to die. So did the past change or not? You're responsible for it. I have so many questions about what this ministry is and who they answer to and how it works. None of this is answered. And then, like I said, the ending, why did they bring these people? What is the goal? Who even knows anymore? I have no idea what happened in this book. Okay. I also just loved how they have all these ethical problems that they kind of mentioned at the very beginning about, bringing these people over without their consent and all, there's so many ethical problems about stealing people out of time and forcing them to be modern and just so many ethical, and no one even cares. And you're like, yeah, okay, great. I also think the writing did not help this issue of clarity at all. The writing was not clear. Okay. So before I get into my overall thoughts about this book, I'm going to read some reviews from Goodreads. I avoided anything that seemed like it was part of the review bombing thing because there was apparently some scandal where there was review bombing of this book and beforehand, which is not cool, but these reviews do not seem to have done that. So I'm still going to read them. Here we go, straight from the cesspit that is Goodreads for your entertainment. From Herondale. It is the most fanfic traditionally published book I have ever read since at least In Memoriam, but that is unfair to In Memoriam. This is even worse. And like with In Memoriam, I feel it's not appropriate, for lack of a better word, to so cheaply use tragic real-life events, the Franklin expedition here, or World War I, for extra pathos and cheap thrills. From G. But reading this book made me contemplate whether I was dumb, sleep-deprived, or in need of another caffeine dosage. The abundant usage of similes and metaphors made my brain short-circuit. From Zelda. I would like to mention that the entire plot of this book is unfeasible and, for lack of a better word, so stupid. The British Ministry of Time, for some reason, rescues 5 dead people from history, for some reason, and gives them to a person who looks after them, for some reason. And then other drivel occurs that I couldn't bother to remember. Point blank, this is fanfic. Yeah, sure, some fanfics can be good books, blah, blah, blah. My real issue with fanfic is that it's a self-insert fanfic in which the author is romanced by a real person, real historical figure, naval captain who died in 1847. Overall, this book was trying to be too many things at once, even before the ridiculous plot twist. Why are you processing your trauma from the Cambodian genocide while at the same time getting your back blown out by a real historical figure while dealing with the ethics of time travel and running from a brigadier from the future trying to kill you? Any plot that wasn't book porn brain rot induced drivel was boring and hard to read. From Horror Nerd, most of the book feels like an extremely dry exploration of politics with concepts, time travel, and avoiding an apocalyptic future pushed to the background. The nameless female protagonist is not a fully realized character and just feels like a rough outline. Her romance with one of the time refugees feels awkward and never reads as real. And then lastly, we have from Mike, up until the final sentence, the last passage of this book demonstrates what the Ministry of Time could have been. The Victorian man who is brought into a supposedly more enlightened time only to find that people are miserable, depressed, lazy, and lacking purpose in a world where even luxury is easy and at our fingertips. In short, it could have been a useful mirror to shine on our own society, an opportunity to reflect on whether the lives we live in this modern world have the integrity and dignity for which our souls crave. But I will say that review gets at one of my biggest complaints about this book, which now I'm going to get to in my overall ratings of this book. Get ready, this book pissed me off personally on so many levels. Pissed me off as a historian. Dear author, do you know that there is an entire profession of professionally trained historians who think about what history is and how it's written and what it means and all that stuff? You're not going to look into anything about that. You're not going to even try to read Foucault or White or anything. You're just going to be vaguely profound about history being a narrative or some crap. It's just triteness and ignorance pretending at profundity. And I, as a professional historian who have been trained in theory, cannot abide by this. Seriously, there are so many underpaid professionals. Please ask one of them to talk about theories of the past and history and narrative, because this is crap. This is seriously so I can't, it just made me so angry. Please go talk to a real historian about history. Maybe I need to do an episode about that, because I thought there was a lot of presentist bullcrap, acting like modernity is both somehow terrible and obviously superior to the past in all ways. It is very unthinking about modernity and the nature of the past and our relationship to it. Clearly, you've thought about nothing about what modernity means outside of absorbing all this self-flagellation about the Anthropocene. It never really thinks deeply about what the past means and the alienness of past experiences. It pretends it a little, saying, giving them language will shape their experience, but it's all very vague and shallow. Don't even get me started on how the narrator thinks that A, we are more rational now somehow, B, she equates rationality with atheism, and C, assumes that all modern people are atheists. I just think this author has never had a deep thought in all her life. What is modernity? What is, how are we different from the people who came before us? How are our lives different than theirs? What are our struggles? Like, it's just it could have been so insightful and profound, diving into what life is for us now and what it used to be. And instead, the only person who kind of rejects modernity just rejects it because he's racist. And it's like, no, actually, there's a lot of other problems with modernity, and the only problem with the past was not just that it was racist, and racism also is a very tricky concept when you're talking about the past, because racism does not always exist in the same way that modern scientific racism exists. That's a very 19th century concept. Anyways, please go pick up a book about history, is all I'm saying. Okay, I also, speaking of things that the book kind of just glosses over and pretends to be profound about, this book, now, I'm going to say, I'm not saying that books shouldn't discuss difficult topics or that these things are bad. Like, obviously, racism is bad. But it feels like either the author or the editor had a checklist that they went through, and we're like, okay, so we got to make sure the book hits all of these important political bullet points. And it's like, okay, it doesn't need to hit all of them. And because it had to hit all of them, it was superficial about all of them. So could we do fewer of them and do them more profoundly? Or perhaps even in a science fiction or fantasy book, we could escape from this world and all of the problems. Why do we have to have every single problem, every single thing in fantasy books? Why can we not escape from those? Why do we have to have every single one? And am I supposed to just pretend that this book is good because it talks about colonialism? Just because it talks about the right issues, I'm supposed to say it's good? No, it feels like pandering is what it feels like. And it spends so much time on all these different things, it doesn't have time to really investigate the interesting ones. As I said before, one of the most interesting parts was the author talking about her parents and her childhood. And that could have been really, really interesting if she had delved more into that one, but she didn't, because she had all of these things that she was trying to talk about, and it just made her be trite. So 1 star, this book sucked. So thank you so much for listening to this episode of I Hated That Book. Tune in next week to hear me complain about yet another mega bestseller. See you next time.